The applause in the ballroom was thunderous, a physical wave of noise that vibrated against my ribs, but the silence inside my chest was absolute. I stood on the stage in a custom champagne silk gown that cost $5,000, watching my husband of 20 years accept an award that my family's money had bought him. I arranged my face into the smile of a proud wife, waiting for the title I had earned. Instead, Christopher pointed a manicured hand at me, flashed that shark-like grin that charmed donors and nurses alike, and said the words that ended our marriage. And my tireless associate, Catherine, she helps out with the paperwork. I wasn't his partner. I wasn't his wife. I was the bank. And he had just defaulted on the loan. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. I knew the script. I had written the script. In the architecture of our public lives, I was the foundation, and Christopher was the facade. That was the deal. I provided the capital, the connections, the generational legitimacy of the waiting lists at the Savannah Yacht Club, and he provided the charm, the medical degree, and the appearance of a self-made man. But tonight, standing under the hot glare of the stage lights, the foundation cracked. To my associate, he repeated, the word hanging in the air like a bad smell. I looked out at the sea of faces in the Charleston Harbor Resort Ballroom. I saw Mrs. Abigail Thorne, whose grandfather had served on the board with my grandfather, tilt her head. She knew. Everyone in the first 3 rows knew. You could hear the sudden, sharp intake of breath from the old money crowd, the people who understood that you do not demote a Beaumont to the level of staff in public. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold despite the heat of the lights. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird trying to break free of a cage made of silk and good manners. Associate? The word bounced around my skull, mocking me. I wasn't an associate. I was the architect who designed the pediatric wing he was being honored for. I was the trustee who signed the check for the $2.5 million donation that secured his seat on the board. I was the woman who had spent the last 2 decades smoothing out the rough edges of his ambition so he could pass as one of us. She helps out, he said, chuckling, a sound that was supposed to be self-deprecating but landed like a slap. Keeps me organized. He turned back to the microphone, dismissing me with a shift of his shoulder. I was dismissed. Just like that. I was no longer the wife standing beside him. I was a prop he was putting back in the box. I felt a sudden, violent urge to step forward, to grab the microphone and list the itemized receipts of his life. The medical school loans I paid off, the practice I bought, the car he drove here. But I didn't. I was raised by a grandmother who believed that a lady never raises her voice. She simply raises the rent. So I stood there. I locked my knees so I wouldn't sway. I kept the smile plastered on my face, even as I felt the corners of my mouth trembling. I focused on the diamond studs in Christopher's ears, diamonds I had bought for his 40th birthday, and I calculated the depreciation of his character. The master of ceremonies, a woman named Petra, who had once tried to sell me essential oils at a charity luncheon, stepped in to fill the awkward silence. "Let's hear it for the team," she chirped, her voice too bright, too loud. The applause that followed was polite, confused. They were clapping for the awkwardness, trying to bury it in noise. I walked off the stage. I didn't wait for him to offer his arm because he didn't offer it. He was too busy shaking hands, basking in the glow of an achievement that belonged to my bank account. I navigated the crowd, moving through the gauntlet of pitying stares. I felt them like physical touches. Poor Catherine, did you hear? He called her an associate. Is there trouble in paradise? I kept my head high. My chin tilted at the angle my mother had taught me was the precise degree of unbothered superiority. But inside, I was screaming. I was cataloging every slight, every late night he claimed he was working, every time he had dismissed my input on the house renovations as cute. It wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of independence. You don't downgrade your primary investor unless you think you've found a new source of funding. The silence in the Range Rover was thick enough to choke on. It was a physical presence, heavy and suffocating, filling the space between the leather seats. Christopher was humming. He was actually humming along to some soft jazz station, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the steering wheel, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just publicly executed our marriage. I stared out the window at the passing blur of streetlights. My reflection in the glass looked ghostly, a pale imitation of the woman who had spent 3 hours getting ready for this night. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to claw at the dashboard. I wanted to ask him who the hell he thought he was. But I waited. I counted the streetlights. 1, 2, 3. I needed to be calm. If I screamed, I was the hysterical wife. If I was calm, I was the judge. "You were quiet tonight," he said, finally breaking the silence as we turned onto our street. His tone was casual, light, as if commenting on the weather. I turned my head slowly to look at him. In the dim light of the dashboard, he looked handsome. That was the problem. He had the kind of face that let him get away with murder, or at least grand larceny. "Associate," I said. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. He glanced at me, his brow furrowing in a performance of confusion. "What?" "You introduced me as your associate, Christopher. Not your wife, not your partner. Your associate who helps with paperwork." He laughed. It was a dismissive, airy sound. "Oh, Catherine, honestly. Are we really doing this? I was in the middle of a speech. I was nervous. I just used the first word that came to me. You're reading way too much into it." "You called me a coworker at your own awards gala," I said, my voice steady, though my hands were shaking in my lap. "In front of the entire board, in front of Abigail Thorne." "So, you do work with me. You did the design for the wing. Technically, you are an associate on the project. Why are you so obsessed with titles? It's a little petty, isn't it?" Petty. The word struck me in the chest. I had paid off $340,000 of his student loans. I had funded his buy-in to the partnership. I paid the mortgage on the house we were driving to, and he was calling me petty for wanting to be acknowledged as his wife. It's not about the title, Christopher. It's about respect. It's about the fact that you erased 20 years of marriage in a single sentence because... I trailed off, the realization hitting me cold and hard. "Because you didn't want to look married tonight." He sighed, a long, exaggerated exhale that signaled his patience was wearing thin. "This is exactly what I was worried about. You've been so high-strung lately. Honestly, Kat, you're ruining a really great night for me. Can't you just be happy that we won?" We. Now it was we. "I am happy you won," I lied. "I just found the choice of words interesting." "It was a slip of the tongue," he said, turning into our driveway. The gravel crunched under the tires, a harsh sound in the quiet night. "Stop overthinking everything. You're making yourself crazy. You know how you get when you spiral." Gaslighting. I knew the term. I had read the articles. But knowing it and feeling it were two different things. He was trying to make me doubt my own reality, to make me feel like the crazy, jealous wife so he could remain the saintly, long-suffering husband. I looked at the house as we approached. My house. My grandfather's house. The columns stood tall and white in the moonlight, indifferent to the drama unfolding in the driveway. He didn't even own a brick of it. And yet, watching him pull the keys from the ignition, I felt like a guest in my own life. Sunlight streamed into the breakfast nook, aggressive and cheerful, at odds with the knot of dread in my stomach. I sat at the marble island, nursing a cup of black coffee, watching Christopher butter a piece of toast. He was wearing his blue scrubs, the ones that made his eyes pop, the ones I knew he wore when he had meetings with donors. He looked refreshed. He looked like a man who had slept the sleep of the just. I, on the other hand, felt like I'd been run over by a truck. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying the gala in my head, dissecting every glance, every word. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, leaning over to kiss me on the cheek. His lips were warm, his cologne the expensive sandalwood scent I had picked out for him last Christmas. I flinched. I couldn't help it. It was a microscopic movement, a tightening of the neck muscles, but he felt it. He pulled back, studying me with a look of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Still upset about yesterday?" he asked, his voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet tone he used on difficult patients, the toxic benevolence. "I didn't sleep well," I said, staring into my coffee. "I can tell," he said softly. "You look exhausted, Catherine. The bags under your eyes are really pronounced today." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His touch made my skin crawl. "Maybe you should take something? I can write you a script for something mild, just to help you take the edge off. You've been so jagged lately." Jagged. He was painting a picture. He was laying the groundwork. If I was jagged, if I was tired, if I was overthinking, then anything I said or did could be dismissed as the ramblings of a menopausal woman losing her grip. "I don't need pills, Christopher. I need to know why you're rewriting our history." He sighed, dropping the toast onto his plate. "See? This is what I mean. You're fixating. It's not healthy, Kat. I'm worried about you. Truly. I think all this charity work is stressing you out. Maybe you should step back, take a sabbatical, go to the spa for a week. On me." On him. The audacity was breathtaking. He was offering to send me away on a vacation paid for with money that was likely mine, just to get me out of the house, to get me out of the way. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Just tired, you're right. I'm probably just overreacting." I needed him to leave. I needed him out of the house so I could breathe, so I could think, so I could stop pretending that I wasn't watching my life disintegrate. "That's my girl," he said, patting my hand, patronizing, condescending. "I've got a long day today, late rounds, don't wait up." "Late rounds," I repeated dully. "Of course." He grabbed his travel mug and headed for the door, whistling. I watched him go, the knot in my stomach tightening until it felt like a fist. Late rounds. That was the code. It had been the code for 6 months. I had told myself it was ambition. I had told myself he was working hard for Yussi. Now, watching his car disappear down the driveway, I realized he had been working hard for an exit strategy. I needed normalcy. I needed to perform the rituals of my life to prove that they still existed. So 2 hours after Christopher left, I drove to the gourmet market in the village to buy ingredients for a dinner I probably wouldn't eat. I filled the cart with autopilot precision. Arugula, imported Parmesan, the specific brand of sparkling water Christopher liked. I was building a stage set for a play that had already closed. I stood at the register, smiling at Mrs. Gable, the cashier who had known my mother. "Just the usual today, Mrs. Gable," I said, swiping my platinum card. The heavy metal card that was linked to the joint account, the account where my quarterly trust dividends were deposited, the account that should have had a balance in the mid-6 figures. The machine beeped, a harsh, dissonant sound. "Oh dear, Mrs. Gable said, adjusting her glasses. "It says declined. Chip must be faulty. Try it again." I frowned. "That's odd. I just used it yesterday." I swiped it again. Beep. Declined. A cold flush of heat crept up my neck. People were waiting in line behind me. I could feel their eyes, the social calculation happening in their heads. "Beaumont declined?" "I'm sorry," I stammered, my hands starting to tremble. "Let me try another one." I pulled out the backup card, the gold one, linked to the savings. Beep. Declined. My world stopped. The ambient noise of the market, the hum of the refrigerators, the chatter of shoppers, faded into a buzzing white noise. This wasn't a bank error. Bank errors don't happen to 2 different cards on 2 different accounts simultaneously. "Mrs. Beaumont?" Mrs. Gable asked gently. Do you want to write a check? No, I whispered. I couldn't write a check. If the cards were declined, the checks would bounce. And a bounced check in this town was worse than a criminal record. It was social suicide. I think there's a hold on the account. Fraud protection. I lied, the words tumbling out too fast. I'll have to call the bank. I'm so sorry. I'll just leave this. I walked away from the cart. I abandoned the arugula and the parmesan. I walked out of the store with my head down, feeling the burning stare of everyone in the line. I got into my car and sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I pulled up the banking app on my phone. Login failed. Please contact your branch. He hadn't just demoted me. He had cut me off. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of my denial. This wasn't just an affair. This was a siege. I drove home doing 10 miles over the speed limit. The panic was morphing into something else now. Adrenaline. Survival instinct. I wasn't the sad wife anymore. I was the prey, realizing the predator was already in the cave. I ran into the house, dropping my purse on the foyer table. I needed documents. I needed the bank statements, the tax returns, the deed to the house. I needed to know how bad the damage was. I went to the study. The heavy oak door was shut. I turned the handle. It didn't move. I frowned, twisting it harder. Locked. Christopher never locked the study. We didn't lock doors inside this house. We had a security system that cost more than most cars. We didn't need internal locks. "Christopher?" I called out, absurdly, as if he might be in there. Silence. I rattled the handle again, frustration bubbling up into a scream that stuck in my throat. He had locked it. He had physically barred me from the financial records of our marriage. I stepped back, staring at the wood grain. Why lock it now? Because there was something in there he couldn't hide on a digital spreadsheet. Paper trails, receipts. I thought about the spare key, the skeleton key that opened all the interior doors. It was usually kept in the antique porcelain bowl on the mantel in the living room. I ran to the living room. The bowl was there. I dumped it out onto the rug. Dried lavender, a few loose coins, a button. No key. He had taken it. I stood in the center of the living room, breathing hard. My sanctuary had become a fortress, and I was on the wrong side of the wall. He had planned this. The awards gala, the associate comment, the locked accounts, the locked door. It was a coordinated strike. I wasn't just losing my husband. I was being erased. I couldn't get into the room, but I had another way. Or I thought I did. The iPad. We shared a tablet that we kept in the kitchen for recipes and music. It was logged into his iCloud account. If he was communicating with someone, if he was moving money, there might be a trace of it there. I found it on the counter next to the coffee maker. I pressed the home button. Enter passcode. My fingers hovered over the glass. It used to be our anniversary. 0612. I tapped it in. The screen shook. Incorrect passcode. My stomach dropped. He had changed it. Of course he had changed it. Think, Catherine, think. What would he change it to? I tried his birthday. Incorrect passcode. I tried the date he graduated medical school. Incorrect passcode. iPad is disabled. Try again in 1 minute. I stared at the timer, my reflection staring back at me from the black glass. I looked deranged. My hair was escaping its clip. My eyes were wide and wild. 1 minute felt like an hour. I paced the kitchen. What was it? What number mattered to him now? The minute passed. I had to be careful. Too many wrong attempts and it would lock for longer or wipe the data. I thought about the woman, the associate. I didn't know her name yet. Not for sure. But I knew there was someone. Maybe it wasn't a date. Maybe it was simple. I tried 1, 2, 3, 4. Incorrect passcode. iPad is disabled. Try again in 5 minutes. I let out a sob of frustration and slammed the tablet down on the counter. I couldn't get in. I was locked out of the bank, locked out of the office, locked out of the digital breadcrumbs. I sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I felt small. I felt stupid. I had let this happen. I had been so busy being the perfect wife, the perfect hostess, the perfect foundation, that I hadn't noticed he was dismantling the house brick by brick. I sat there watching the dust motes dance in the shaft of sunlight, waiting for the timer to count down. I needed a win. I needed one single crack in his armor, and then the mail slot clattered. I looked up. The Daily Mail had just been delivered. I scrambled up from the floor, wiping my face. I walked to the front door and scooped up the pile of envelopes, bills, catalogs, an invitation to a charity auction, and then, near the bottom, a plain white envelope. No return address, just a logo. A cellular provider, but not our provider. We were with the major national carrier. This was a budget carrier, the kind you buy prepaid cards for at the gas station. It was addressed to Christopher. My hands shook as I held it. He must have missed it. He was usually so careful intercepting the mail before I saw it. But he had been late this morning. He had been distracted by his own performance. I didn't bother with a letter opener. I tore the top off, ripping the paper in my haste. I pulled out the statement. It was for a single line, a burner phone. I scanned the call log. Pages of it. Outgoing calls to the same number over and over again. Late nights, early mornings. The times when he was at the hospital. I looked at the number. It was local. I walked back to the kitchen, clutching the paper like a weapon. I didn't have the password. I didn't have the office key, but I had a number. And for the first time in 24 hours, the paralyzing fear in my chest began to cool into something harder, something useful. I wasn't an associate. I was the architect, and I was about to inspect the structural integrity of his lies. I sat at the kitchen island, the paper trembling in my hand like a living thing. The bill was cheap, printed on flimsy recycled paper, a stark contrast to the heavy cream cardstock of our usual correspondence. My eyes traced the column of digits, the same number, over and over again. I felt a wave of nausea roll through me, hot and sour. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the volume of it. He wasn't just cheating. He was living a second life in 15-minute increments, 7 in the morning, 10 at night, 2 in the afternoon when he was supposed to be in surgery. I needed to know. I needed to hear the voice on the other end. My hand hovered over my own phone. If I called from my cell, she would see my number. If I called from the house line and Christopher checked the bill, which he obviously did, unlike me, he would know. I looked at the landline handset. I picked it up and pressed *67. My grandmother had taught me that code when I was 12, though back then it was to prank call the boys at the prep school. Now it was a shield. I dialed the number. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, erratic rhythm that made my breath catch in my throat. What if he answers? I thought. What if he's with her right now? The line rang, once, twice. Hello? It was a woman. Her voice was young, bright, breathless. It sounded like sunshine and optimism. It sounded like a woman who didn't have a mortgage or a 20-year marriage dissolving in her hands. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up, seized by a paralysis of grief and rage. "Hello? Is anyone there?" she asked again, sounding annoyed now. "If this is the pharmacy, I already picked up the prescription." I hung up. My hand slammed the receiver down into the cradle with a violence that rattled the base. The pharmacy. She was comfortable enough to be annoyed. She wasn't hiding. She was living her life, picking up prescriptions, answering calls from her lover, completely oblivious or perhaps uncaring that her happiness was being subsidized by my inheritance. I stared at the bill again. The total due was $42. He had risked our entire life, our reputation, everything we had built for a $42 secret. I folded the paper carefully, turning the sharp edges against my thumb until it hurt. I took it upstairs and hid it inside the hollow spine of an antique book on the library shelf. the architecture of the South. He never read books about my work. It was the safest place in the house. The bank was a fortress of glass and polished steel in the center of the financial district. I used to walk in here and feel a sense of ownership. My family had banked with First Citizens since before the Great Depression. The branch manager used to send me birthday cards, but the manager had retired 3 years ago, and the man sitting behind the mahogany desk now was named Mr. Sterling. He was young, efficient, and had the dead eyes of a bureaucrat who enjoyed saying no. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Beaumont Hayes," he said, his fingers interlocked on the desk. "I cannot grant you access to the transaction history for the LLC account. Your name is not on the incorporation documents." I sat straighter, smoothing the fabric of my skirt. I was wearing my armor, a navy blazer, pearls, the diamond solitaire. I needed to look like money, even if I couldn't access any. "Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice low and dangerous. "That LLC is funded entirely by transfers from our joint account, which is funded by my trust. I am not asking for permission. I am asking for transparency." "I understand your position," he said, not sounding understanding at all. "But privacy laws are strict. Dr. Hayes is the sole signatory. If you want to see those records, you will need his authorization, or a subpoena." A subpoena. The word hung in the air, cold and legal. "I see," I said. I leaned forward. "Let me explain something to you. My grandfather's portrait hangs in the lobby of your corporate headquarters. The Beaumont Trust currently holds assets in this bank that exceed the GDP of a small island nation. If I walk out of here today without a clear answer, I will move every single cent to Chase by close of business." It was a bluff. I couldn't move the trust assets without the other trustees' approval, and that would take weeks. But Mr. Sterling didn't know that. I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He swallowed. I can't print anything," he whispered, glancing at the security camera in the corner, "and I can't give you the login." "I don't need a printout," I said, my voice softening. "Just turn the screen. Show me where the money went last month. Just 1 month." He hesitated. He looked at the door. Then, with a sigh of resignation, he rotated the monitor 45 degrees. I leaned in. My eyes scanned the lines of data. It was a language I understood. Withdrawals, transfers, $5,000 to Blue Water Resort, $12,000 to Medical Supply Corp, Shell Company, $8,000 to Tiffany & Company. My breath hitched. "Tiffany. Thank you," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Mrs. Beaumont Hayes," Sterling said, turning the screen back quickly. "The account balance, it's low. There's less than $2,000 remaining." I stood up. My knees felt weak, like the bones had turned to water. He had drained it. He had taken the quarterly dividend, $50,000, and burned through almost all of it in 6 weeks. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I said. "You've been very helpful." I walked out of the bank into the blinding afternoon sun. I felt lightheaded. It wasn't just cheating, it was looting. He was stripping the copper wiring out of the walls of our marriage before he burned the house down. I was chopping vegetables when Christopher came home. I was attacking a carrot with a chef's knife, the rhythmic thud, thud, thud against the cutting board, the only thing keeping me from screaming. "Hey, honey," he called out from the foyer. He sounded cheerful, too cheerful. He walked into the kitchen, loosening his tie. He looked handsome, damn him. He looked like the man I had fallen in love with in graduate school, before the debt and the pretension. "Smells good," he said, coming up behind me. He tried to wrap his arms around my waist. I stiffened. I couldn't help it. The image of the Tiffany charge flashed in my mind. Who was wearing the bracelet? The girl with the breathless voice? "Careful," I said, pulling away. "I have a knife." He laughed, backing off. "Feisty. Listen, I have some bad news. The board is sending me to Atlanta this weekend. Emergency conference on the new robotic surgery protocols. It's a total bore, but I have to go." Atlanta. The classic lie. It was almost insulting in its lack of creativity. "This weekend?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the carrot. "But we were supposed to go to the dinner at the club with the Hamiltons." I know, he said, leaning against the counter, putting on his sad face. "I tried to get out of it, but they insist. Besides," he tilted his head, studying me with that faux clinical concern. "You've seemed so stressed lately, Catherine. Maybe a quiet weekend alone would be good for you. You could catch up on your sleep. You look like you're barely holding it together." There it was, the toxic benevolence. He was framing his adultery as a favor to my mental health. "I'm fine, Christopher," I said, slicing the carrot into oblivion. "I'm just busy." "You're not fine," he said softly. "You're jagged. I can feel it. Just take the weekend. Order in. Take a long bath. I'll handle the conference." "Where are you staying?" I asked. "The Hyatt downtown," he said without missing a beat. "Same as always." I nodded. "Okay, well, travel safe." "You're the best," he said, grabbing a slice of raw carrot. "I'm going to go pack." I watched him leave the room. The Hyatt. He was so confident. He thought I was a piece of furniture, stationary, predictable, and silent. He didn't know that furniture could be heavy, and if you dropped it from a high enough window, it could crush a man. I had never bought spy equipment before. I had designed high-security wings for hospitals, but I had never personally purchased a tracking device. I stood in the aisle of the home improvement store, surrounded by men in dirty work boots and flannel shirts. I was wearing a silk blouse and trying to look invisible. I felt ridiculous. I felt cheap. I found the section, GPS trackers, keep tabs on your keys, or your pets, or your lying husband. I grabbed a package, a small black tile. It cost $29. I walked to the register. The cashier was a teenage boy with acne and a name tag that said Tyler. He scanned the item. $29.99, he mumbled. I reached for my wallet, then I remembered. The cards were declined. I had the emergency cash stash, $200 I kept in a hollowed-out book, but I had to be careful. I counted out the bills. 3 tens. "Do you want a receipt?" Tyler asked. "No," I said quickly. "No receipt." I took the bag and walked out to my car. I sat in the parking lot, ripping open the plastic clamshell packaging with my teeth because I didn't have scissors. The plastic cut my lip. I tasted copper. I downloaded the app on my phone. Pairing mode. I held the button down. Nothing happened. "Come on," I hissed, hitting the steering wheel. "Work." My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the tiny device between the seat and the center console. No. I scrambled to retrieve it, jamming my hand into the dark crevice. My fingers brushed against old French fries and dust bunnies. I grasped the cold plastic and pulled it out. It beeped. Connected. I named the device Luggage, just in case he found it on my phone. I sat there, holding the little black disc. This was my life now. I wasn't designing buildings. I was tracking a man who had already left me. 2 a.m. The house was a living thing at night, settling with groans and creaks that sounded like footsteps. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening. Christopher was snoring. It was a soft, rhythmic sound that used to comfort me. Now it sounded like the ticking of a bomb. I crept down the stairs, skipping the 4th step because it always squeaked. I was barefoot, holding the GPS tile in a clenched fist. I opened the door to the garage slowly. The smell of oil and cold concrete hit me. His car, the charcoal gray BMW sedan, sat there like a sleeping beast. I approached it. The garage was dark, illuminated only by the faint green light of the sprinkler system control box on the wall. I tried the passenger door. Locked. Of course. I had his keys in my pocket. I had taken them from the bowl in the kitchen. I pressed the unlock button. The lights flashed. The chirp echoed in the garage like a gunshot. I froze. I stared at the door to the house, waiting for it to fly open, waiting for him to stand there and ask what his wife was doing breaking into his car at 2 a.m. Silence. I exhaled, a shaky breath that fogged in the cold air. I opened the door. Where to put it? The glove box was too obvious. Under the mat? No, the detailer's cleaned there. I felt under the passenger seat. There was a slit in the carpet where the seat railing was bolted down, a dark void. I shoved the tile deep into the slit. As I pulled my hand back, a sharp piece of metal caught the back of my hand. I hissed in pain, jerking my arm away. I slammed the door shut and locked the car. I ran back into the house, my heart thumping so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. In the kitchen, under the light of the stove hood, I looked at my hand. A long, thin scratch was welling with blood. I washed it in the sink, watching the red swirl down the drain. I put a Band-Aid on it. If he asked, I cut myself chopping vegetables. Another lie. We were building a cathedral of lies, Christopher and I, but mine were structural. His were purely decorative. Saturday morning. He was dressed in his business casual attire, a crisp polo and khakis. He kissed me on the forehead. "I'll call you when I get to the hotel," he said. "Drive safe," I said. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears. I watched him back out of the driveway. As soon as his car turned the corner, the timer started. I ran to my car. I had parked it facing out, ready to go. I had the app open on my phone. The little blue dot was moving. I pulled out onto the street. I stayed 3 cars back. Driving in Savannah traffic is a nightmare of tourists and horse-drawn carriages. But today the roads were clear, too clear. There was nowhere to hide. I watched the back of his BMW. He turned left onto Bay Street. Left. The highway to Atlanta was right. "Got you," I whispered. He was heading toward the coast, toward the islands. I followed him over the bridge. The marsh stretched out on either side, vast and green and indifferent. My phone screen buzzed, a text from my mother. "Are you coming to brunch tomorrow?" I swiped it away. I couldn't think about brunch. I couldn't think about my mother. The blue dot turned off the main road. I slowed down. If I turned too soon, he'd see me in the rearview mirror. I waited. I counted to 10. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. I turned. It was a long, winding road lined with live oaks draped in Spanish moss. At the end of the road was a gate. The Sanctuary Resort and Spa. I pulled onto the shoulder before the gatehouse. I watched through the trees. Christopher pulled up to the guard shack. He rolled down his window. He handed something to the guard. A card? A pass? The gate opened. He drove through. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel. I couldn't go in. It was a private resort, members only. But I knew where he was, and I knew he wasn't alone. I looked at the app. The blue dot stopped moving. Location: the Sanctuary, Guest Villa 4. I took a screenshot. My hand was shaking, but I forced it to be steady. This was evidence. This was ammunition. Now, I just had to figure out how to blow up the bunker. I sat in my car on the shoulder of the road, the engine idling, the air conditioning blasting against the sweat that had pooled at the base of my neck. The gate to the sanctuary was a solid wall of wrought iron and exclusivity. I couldn't drive through it, but I knew the geography of this island. I knew that every private beach in Georgia had to have public access points by law, a zoning ordinance my grandfather had complained about for 40 years. I put the car in drive and U-turned, tires squealing on the asphalt. I drove 3 miles down to the public lot, a cracked slab of concrete next to a decaying pier. I parked between a rusted pickup truck and a minivan packed with beach toys. I looked out of place in my linen trousers and driving loafers, a refugee from the country club lost in the real world. I walked. The path to the beach was a narrow boardwalk through the dunes. The sand was hot enough to burn through the soles of my shoes. I walked north toward the pristine white umbrellas of the sanctuary. The heat was oppressive. My hair, usually sprayed into submission, began to frizz in the humidity. I felt like a stalker. I was a stalker. I reached the property line. A polite sign informed me that beyond this point was for guests only. I stepped over the invisible line. I kept my head down, pretending to look for shells, scanning the row of oceanfront villas. Villa 4. That's what the app had said. I counted the roofs. 1, 2, 3, 4. It was a sprawling bungalow with a private deck overlooking the dunes. The sliding glass doors were open. I stopped. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. A woman walked out onto the deck. She was wearing a white bikini, not the kind you swim in, but the kind you wear to be looked at. She was young, painfully, aggressively young. Her stomach was flat, her skin bronzed and glowing. She held a glass of white wine in one hand and a phone in the other. Then Christopher walked out. He was wearing his swim trunks, the navy ones I had bought him for our trip to Cabo 3 years ago. He walked up behind her. He didn't touch her tentatively. He wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her flush against him, burying his face in her neck. I watched them. I watched my husband, the man who claimed his back hurt too much to mow the lawn, lift this woman off her feet and spin her around. She laughed. I couldn't hear it over the crash of the waves, but I saw her head thrown back, her mouth open in a display of pure, unadulterated joy. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, a physical ache where my heart used to be. It wasn't just jealousy. It was the theft of it. He was giving her the version of himself I hadn't seen in a decade. The playful, affectionate, attentive man. He hadn't lost that man. He had just reallocated him to a new investor. I retreated to the cover of the sea oats, crouching behind a dune like a criminal. I needed proof. My word against his would be dismissed as hysteria. Christopher could talk his way out of a murder charge with a smile and a reference to his charity work. I needed hard evidence. I dug my phone out of my purse. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it in the sand. I opened the camera app. I zoomed in. The digital zoom was grainy, pixelating their faces into impressionist blurs. Click. I took a photo of them sitting on the lounge chairs. Click. I took a photo of him rubbing sunscreen on her back. Click. I felt sick. Voyeurism was a dirty business. I was documenting the demolition of my own life frame by frame. Then the woman, Monica, if the phone bill was right, stood up and turned toward the beach. She pointed at the water. Christopher stood up to join her. This was it. The money shot. Their faces clear and undeniable, together in a place he claimed not to be. I tapped the shutter button. The screen went black. I stared at the phone. A spinning wheel appeared in the center. Shutting down. No, I whispered. No, no, no. I pressed the power button. A red battery icon flashed, mocking me. I had forgotten to charge it last night. I had been too busy pacing the floor, too busy panicking. Please, I begged the inanimate object. Just one more. It stayed black. I looked back at the villa. They were walking down the stairs to the beach. They were holding hands. I had nothing. I had grainy photos that could be anyone. I had a dead phone. I had a sunburn starting to prickle on my shoulders. I sat in the sand and lowered my head onto my knees. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march up there and throw sand in their faces. But I couldn't. I was Catherine Beaumont. We didn't make scenes. We made strategic withdrawals. I stood up, brushing the sand from my knees. I had seen enough. I didn't have the photo, but I had the image burned into my retinas. And unlike a digital file, that couldn't be deleted. The drive back to Savannah was a blur of tears and road rage. I was doing 80 on the interstate, fueled by a cocktail of adrenaline and despair. The sky, which had been bright and mocking an hour ago, had turned a bruised purple. A summer storm was rolling in. The rain hit the windshield like bullets. I slowed down, the wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. Then, a sound like a gunshot. Bang. The steering wheel jerked violently to the right. The car shuddered, the rim grinding against the asphalt with a bone-jarring vibration. "You have got to be kidding me," I said, my voice cracking. I wrestled the car to the shoulder, the hazards clicking a frantic rhythm. I sat there for a moment, the rain drumming on the roof, sealing me in a gray box of misery. I reached for my phone to call roadside assistance. Then I remembered. It was dead. And even if it wasn't, I had canceled the premium auto club membership last month when Christopher told me we needed to tighten the belt for the new wing donation. I was alone. On the side of I-16, in a rainstorm. I opened the door. The wind whipped my hair across my face, blinding me. I stepped out into the mud. My loafers sank instantly. I walked to the trunk. I had never changed a tire in my life. Christopher always handled the cars. "Don't worry your pretty little head about mechanics," he used to say. I opened the trunk and stared at the spare tire. It looked heavy. It was heavy. I dragged it out, grunting with the effort, smearing grease on my linen trousers. I found the jack. I found the tire iron. I knelt in the mud, the water soaking through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. I fitted the iron over the lug nut. I pushed. It didn't move. I pushed harder, throwing my entire body weight against it. My hands slipped. My knuckles scraped against the rough pavement. "Damn it!" I screamed, the sound lost in the roar of passing trucks. I looked at my hand. Blood was mixing with the rain and the grease. I started to cry. Ugly, heaving sobs that shook my shoulders. It wasn't about the tire. It was about the helplessness. I was a 42-year-old woman with a master's degree and a trust fund, and I was kneeling in the dirt, unable to perform a basic survival task because I had allowed a man to make me dependent. I wiped my face with a greasy hand. No, I wasn't going to die here. I wasn't going to let him win. I stood up. I put my foot on the tire iron. I stomped on it. The nut gave way with a screech of protesting metal. I laughed, a manic, wet sound. "I don't need you," I whispered to the rain. "I don't need you for anything." I got home after dark, looking like I had been in a bar fight. I was wet, dirty, and limping. I stripped off my ruined clothes in the mudroom and walked naked to the shower. I scrubbed my skin until it was pink and raw, washing away the beach, the road, the shame. I wrapped myself in a robe and went downstairs. The house was silent. I went to the study door, still locked. I went to the kitchen and opened the junk drawer. I dug through the mess of twist ties and batteries until I found it. The key to the garden shed. I walked out into the backyard. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick and heavy. I unlocked the shed. It smelled of gasoline and fertilizer. I turned on the flashlight. There, hanging on a nail above the workbench, was a spare set of house keys. Christopher kept them there for the landscapers. I prayed the study key was on the ring. I ran back inside. I tried the small brass key. It slid into the lock. Click. The door swung open. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I used the flashlight, keeping the beam low. I felt like a burglar in my own home. I went straight to the filing cabinet. It was locked, too. "Seriously?" I muttered. I grabbed a letter opener from the desk. I jammed it into the lock mechanism. I wiggled it. I twisted it. I remembered reading in a mystery novel that file cabinet locks were cheap. I pulled the drawer hard while twisting the metal. It popped open with a metallic clang. I started pulling files, taxes, investments, Summit Surgical, LLC. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, surrounded by paper. I had a calculator and a notepad. I started adding the credit card statements he had hidden, the withdrawals. August, $6,000. September, $8,500. October, $12,000. It wasn't just dinners and hotels, it was rent. He was paying rent on a commercial property. I found the lease agreement, Unit B, North Charleston Industrial Park. And then I found the loan documents. He hadn't just spent our cash. He had taken out a business line of credit, $200,000, and under collateral, in neat block letters, the Beaumont Family Trust. He had forged my signature. I stared at the scrawl at the bottom of the page. It looked like my name. It had the same loops, the same slant. He had practiced. I felt a coldness settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This wasn't a divorce anymore. This was a felony. Monday morning. I sat in the leather wingback chair in the office of Paxton and Sterling. Sutton Paxton was 70 years old, wore bow ties without irony, and had been handling my family's legal affairs since before I was born. He looked at the papers I had spread out on his mahogany desk. He adjusted his spectacles. "Catherine," he said, his voice grave, "this is significant." "He forged my signature, Sutton," I said. "He leveraged the trust." "Technically," Sutton said, leaning back, "he leveraged his expected interest in the marital assets, but listing the trust specifically as collateral without your authorization? That is fraud. Bank fraud. Securities fraud, potentially." "So I can crush him," I said. It wasn't a question. Sutton sighed. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "It's not that simple. If we report the fraud, the bank will call the loan immediately. Since the LLC has no assets, because he spent it all, they will come after the guarantor, you. But I didn't sign it. Proving that takes time. Forensic handwriting analysis, court dates. In the meantime, the bank freezes everything. Your accounts, the trust distributions, the house." I stared at him. "So he steals from me, and if I report him, I lose my house." "The law is a blunt instrument, Catherine," Sutton said gently. "However, there are other ways to skin this particular cat. Tell me." "We let him think he's safe," Sutton said, a shark-like smile appearing on his face. "We let him dig the hole deeper. And while he's digging, we sever the connection between the trust and the marriage. We restructure. We evict. We make sure that when the house of cards falls, you are standing on the sidewalk watching, not inside the building." "How long?" I asked. "A few weeks," Sutton said. "Can you play the part? Can you live in that house with him and pretend you don't know he's a criminal?" I thought about the woman on the balcony. I thought about the tire iron. "Sutton," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "I'm a Southern woman. I've been pretending to be pleasant when I wanted to scream since I was in kindergarten. I can play the part." Christopher came home Sunday night. He looked tan. He looked rested. He brought me a box of saltwater taffy. "From Atlanta," he said, kissing my cheek. "The hotel gift shop had them. I know you love the peppermint ones." Saltwater taffy, from a landlocked city. The sloppiness of the lie was almost insulting. "Thank you, darling," I said, putting the box on the counter. "How was the conference?" "Exhausting," he said, opening the fridge and grabbing a beer. "But productive. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. Here it comes." He leaned against the counter, giving me his best visionary doctor look. The robotic surgery stuff. It got me thinking. The future isn't in hospitals, Kat. It's in private wellness centers, concierge medicine. "Really?" I asked, sipping my water to hide the tremor in my lip. "Yes, I met some guys there. Investors. They're putting together a project, Summit Surgical, a state-of-the-art facility. They want me to lead it." "That sounds prestigious," I said. "It is. But here's the thing. To get the equity share, the founder's share, I need to buy in. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but we need capital." "How much capital?" I asked. $50,000, he said. "Just for the initial buy-in. I know things have been a little tight, but with the trust dividend coming next month, I think we should do it. It's an investment in us. In us." He was asking me to fund the business he was building with his mistress. He was asking me to pay for the lifeboat he was going to use to sail away from me. I looked at him. I looked at the man I had shared a bed with for 20 years. I saw the greed in his eyes, masked as enthusiasm. $50,000 is a lot of money, Christopher," I said softly. "It's not spending, it's investing," he said, stepping closer, putting his hand on my shoulder. "Don't you trust me? I'm doing this for our future, so I can retire early, so we can travel. Don't you want that?" I forced myself not to recoil. I forced myself to smile. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Of course I want that, I said. Let me look at the accounts. I'll see what I can move around. That's my girl, he said, squeezing my shoulder. You're the best partner a man could ask for. He walked out of the room, whistling. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the box of taffy. I didn't eat one. I threw the whole box in the trash. He wanted $50,000? Fine. I'd give him something. But it wouldn't be a check. It would be a reckoning. I needed to see the enemy up close. I needed to know if she was just a body in a white bikini or if she was smart. I found her name on the LLC paperwork I had liberated from the filing cabinet. Monica Vance, Chief Operating Officer. A quick search on the hospital website confirmed she was a 29-year-old nurse practitioner in the orthopedic wing. I tracked her to a coffee shop 2 blocks from the hospital. It was the kind of place that sold $5 oat milk lattes and played acoustic covers of pop songs. I sat in the corner, hidden behind a pair of oversized sunglasses and a copy of Architectural Digest, waiting. She walked in at 10:15 in the morning. She was wearing scrubs, but they were tailored, tight in all the places Christopher would notice. She ordered a matcha tea. I waited until she turned from the counter, then I stood up, timing my collision perfectly. "Oh!" I gasped, letting my purse slide off my shoulder, spilling its contents onto the floor. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," she said, instinctively dropping to her knees to help me. I looked at her. Up close, she was flawless. Poreless skin, bright eyes, the kind of natural vitality that you can't buy in a bottle. It made me feel ancient. It made me feel tired. No, my fault, I said, reaching for my lipstick. I'm just so clumsy lately. My husband says I need to slow down. She froze. Her hand hovered over my compact mirror. She looked up at me, and I saw the recognition flash behind her eyes. She knew exactly who I was. I was the wife, the obstacle, the bank. You're Mrs. Hayes, right? She asked, her voice steady but cautious. Dr. Hayes' wife? I think I've seen you at the hospital gala. I am, I smiled, taking the mirror from her. And you work with Christopher? I'm Monica, she said, standing up. She didn't offer her hand. I work in ortho. We collaborate sometimes. Collaborate, I repeated, tasting the word. Christopher speaks so highly of his team. He's so dedicated. He works such long hours. She smiled then, and it was the most condescending expression I had ever seen. It was a smile of pity. He does, she said. He carries a lot of weight on his shoulders. The hospital administration can be so rigid. He's a visionary. He really needs people around him who understand his potential. People like me, not like you, she didn't say. But I heard it. Well, he's lucky to have such supportive colleagues, I said, putting my sunglasses back on. I worry about his stress levels. He's 45, you know. He has to be careful with his heart. I saw a flicker of annoyance in her eyes at the mention of his age. He's in great shape, she said sharply. He has the energy of a man half his age. Of course, I said, turning to leave. It was lovely to meet you, Monica. I'm sure I'll be seeing a lot more of you. I walked out of the coffee shop, my heart pounding. She wasn't just a fling, she was a believer. She bought into his myth because she helped write it, and worse, she thought I was the anchor dragging him down. 2 days later, I sat in the tea room of the Charleston Place Hotel with my cousin Barrett. Barrett was the chairman of the board at the hospital. He was family. He had walked me down the aisle when my father couldn't. The tea is excellent, Catherine, Barrett said, buttering a scone. But you didn't ask me here to discuss the merits of Earl Grey. You look resolute. That's the look your mother used to get right before she fired a contractor. I set my cup down. I didn't want to do this. Destroying Christopher's reputation would splash mud on me, too, but I had no choice. Barrett, I said quietly, I need to talk to you about the family's pledge, the $2.5 million for the new surgical wing. Barrett stopped chewing. Is there a problem? The groundbreaking is next month. I need to put a hold on the disbursement, I said. He frowned. Catherine, You know we've already allocated those funds in the budget. Contracts are signed. If you pull the money now, it creates a significant deficit. Does Christopher know? Christopher is the reason I'm pulling it, I said. Barrett stared at me. I don't understand. I have reason to believe that there are ethical liabilities regarding the leadership of that wing, I said, choosing my words with the precision of a surgeon. I am currently conducting an audit of our personal finances, and I have found irregularities, significant ones. Irregularities, Barrett repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. Are you saying he's stealing? I'm saying that he has leveraged the Beaumont name to secure loans without my consent, I said. And I have reason to believe he is misrepresenting his relationship with the board to outside investors for a private venture. Barrett's face went pale. In our world, adultery was a scandal, but financial impropriety was a death sentence. Catherine, he said, leaning in, if this is true, if he's using the hospital's name to defraud investors, the board has to know. We have compliance issues. We have liability. I know, I said. That's why I'm telling you. But I need time. I need a few weeks to secure my position before the bomb goes off. I need you to freeze the project, but tell him it's a bureaucratic delay. Blame the city permits. Blame the EPA. Just don't let him touch another dime of family money. Barrett looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll call the project manager today, he said. We've had some concerns about the HVAC system. That should buy you a month. Thank you, Barrett. Kat, he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Do you want me to kill him? Professionally speaking? Not yet, I said, picking up my tea. I want to watch him starve first. The next stop was the lawyer's office to sign the papers that would officially sever the financial artery. Sutton had the documents ready. This is the revocation of access, Sutton explained, sliding a heavy stack of paper across the desk. Once you sign this, the joint account is frozen. The credit cards linked to the trust are canceled. The automatic transfer that pays the mortgage, the car payments, the club dues, it all stops. Do it, I said, picking up the pen. My phone buzzed. It was Christopher. I stared at the screen. Hubby calling. I hadn't changed the contact name yet. Answer it, Sutton whispered. Act normal. He's probably checking on the money. I took a breath and swiped answer. Hey, honey, I said, my voice light. Catherine, Christopher said. He sounded stressed. I could hear the background noise of the hospital cafeteria. Did you go to the bank? The transfer for the $50,000 hasn't hit the account yet. The investors are pushing me. Oh, I know, I said, rolling my eyes at Sutton. I was just there. Mr. Sterling said there's some sort of new federal regulation on large transfers. Homeland Security or something? It's holding everything up for 48 hours. Homeland Security? He snapped. That's ridiculous. We transfer money all the time. I know, it's so annoying, I said, channeling my best helpless wife persona. I yelled at him, Christopher. I really did. But he said his hands are tied. He said it should clear by Friday. He exhaled, a sharp hiss of frustration. Friday? Catherine, I told them I'd have the check today. This makes me look incompetent. I'm so sorry, darling, I cooed. I'm doing everything I can. Maybe you can just explain to them? Tell them the bank is being difficult. I can't tell them my wife can't manage a simple wire transfer, he muttered. The insult stung, but I let it slide. I'll try again tomorrow, I promised. Don't worry, I'll fix it. You better, he said, and hung up. I looked at Sutton. He's desperate. He's already promised the money. Good, Sutton said. When a man is desperate, he makes mistakes. Sign the papers. I signed my name. With every stroke of the pen, I felt the weight on my chest lighten. I was cutting the rope. He was in free fall, and he didn't even know it yet. The administrative violence began the next morning. I sat at my desk with a list of numbers and a cup of coffee that finally tasted good. Item 1, the BMW 7 Series. I called the insurance broker. Yes, this is Catherine Hayes. I'd like to remove the BMW from the policy, effective immediately. Of course, Mrs. Hayes. Did you sell the vehicle? We're restructuring our fleet, I said vaguely. Just the Audi remains covered, and send the cancellation notice to the house address, please. Certainly. Item 2, the Charleston Country Club. Membership services, a cheerful voice answered. This is Catherine Hayes. I noticed a discrepancy in our dues. I'd like to remove the associate member from my account. The associate member? You mean Dr. Hayes? Yes. The primary membership is in my name, correct? As a legacy member? That is correct. Your grandfather was a founding member. Excellent. Please remove Dr. Hayes. He's not using the facilities enough to justify the expense. We're tightening the belt. I see. He won't have gate access, Mrs. Hayes, or golf privileges. I understand, I said. Please deactivate his fob today. I hung up. It felt petty. It felt small. But it was necessary. Christopher defined himself by these symbols: the car, the club, the access. Without them, he was just a guy with a lot of debt and a wandering eye. I wasn't just taking his money, I was stripping his identity. Sutton called me late Thursday afternoon. I found something interesting in the property records, he said. His voice had that dry, lawyerly amusement. What is it? I asked, pacing the living room. So, the house on Trad Street. It's in the trust, obviously. But when you and Christopher moved in 20 years ago, your father had you sign a lease agreement to keep the tax status clean. I remember, I said. $1 a year. Correct. But here's the kicker. The lease is in your name only. Christopher is listed as an authorized occupant, not a tenant, an occupant. What's the difference? The difference, Sutton said, is that a tenant has rights. An occupant is a guest who can have their invitation revoked at any time by the leaseholder. I stopped pacing. I looked around the room. I looked at the crown molding, the antique rug, the fireplace where we hung our stockings every Christmas. Are you saying I can kick him out? I'm saying you don't need a divorce decree to make him leave, Sutton said. You just need to revoke his guest privileges. Technically, he's trespassing the moment you tell him to go. Can I change the locks? If you give him reasonable notice to retrieve his property? Absolutely. It's your house, Catherine. He's just crashing on the couch. I laughed. It was a cold, hard sound. For 20 years, he had acted like the lord of the manor. He had complained about the heating bill, critiqued the landscaping, hosted his colleagues in the dining room as if he owned the table. And all this time, he was just a long-term house guest. Draft the notice, I said. Have it ready. Friday lunch. I was in the garden pruning the roses, aggressively. My phone rang. Christopher. Catherine, he was shouting. I could hear the clatter of silverware and the hum of a busy restaurant. Hello, darling, why are you shouting? My card, he hissed. I'm at Hall's Chop House. I'm with the investors. I just tried to pay for lunch. The corporate card. It was declined. Oh, no, I said, clipping a dead head off a yellow rose. That's terrible. It's humiliating. The waiter came back to the table and said card declined loud enough for everyone to hear. I had to ask one of the investors to cover it. Do you have any idea how that looks? I can imagine, I said. It looks like you don't have any money. Why isn't it working? He demanded. You said the transfer would clear by Friday. I don't know, Christopher, I lied. Maybe the bank froze the card because of the suspicious activity? You know, with the transfer being flagged by Homeland Security and all. Suspicious activity? I am trying to build a business here. I'm sure it's just a glitch, I said soothingly. Do you have your personal card? I tried that one too. It's maxed out. Of course it was. He had bought a diamond bracelet with it. Well, maybe you should have checked the balance before you ordered the Wagyu beef, I said, letting a tiny drop of venom seep into my voice. There was a silence on the line, a moment where he processed my tone. Catherine, he said slowly. "What is going on?" "I'm pruning the roses, Christopher," I said. "I really have to go. The aphids are terrible this year. They just suck the life out of everything until the flower dies. But don't worry, I'm getting rid of them." I hung up. I stood there in the sunlight, holding the shears. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, clear certainty. He was beginning to panic. The cracks were showing. It was time to bring the whole house down. I heard the Audi roar up the driveway, the engine revving with the aggression of a man who felt the world owed him an explanation. I was upstairs in the master suite. I had spent the last hour packing his things. Not neatly, not with the care of a wife. I had shoved his bespoke suits into garbage bags. I had thrown his expensive Italian loafers into a cardboard box labeled Misk. I heard the front door slam. The house shuddered. "Catherine!" he screamed. His voice cracked, high and thin with panic. I didn't answer. I sat in the wingback chair by the window, sipping iced tea, listening to his heavy footsteps pounding up the stairs. He tried the bedroom door. The handle rattled violently, then a thud, his shoulder hitting the wood. "Open this door! Why is it locked?" I set my tea down on the coaster. I walked to the door, but I didn't open it. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood. "The door is locked, Christopher, because this is a private residence," I said calmly, "and you are no longer on the guest list." "Guest list? What the hell are you talking about? I live here. This is my house." "Actually," I said, "it isn't. As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, Sutton filed the notice to vacate. You are an authorized occupant whose authorization has been revoked. You have 30 minutes to collect your personal effects before I call the sheriff." "You're insane," he spat. "You can't kick me out. We're married." "Marriage is a contract," I said. "And so is the deed to this house. You violated both. Now step away from the door so I can put your bags in the hallway." "I'm not going anywhere," he shouted. "I'm going to break this door down." "If you do," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper he had to lean in to hear, "you will add destruction of property to the list of felonies Sutton is currently compiling. Fraud, forgery, securities violations. Do you really want to add a domestic disturbance charge to your resume right before the medical board review?" Silence. Heavy breathing silence on the other side of the door. He was calculating. He was realizing that the wall he was hitting wasn't made of drywall. It was made of money and law, two things he was rapidly running out of. "You're bluffing," he said, but the conviction was gone. "Try me," I said. "I've already called Deputy Miller. He's on patrol in the neighborhood. He hates paperwork, Christopher. He really hates arresting doctors in their own driveways. Don't make him do it." He didn't leave. He went downstairs and started pouring himself a drink. I heard the clink of the crystal decanter. He was going to wait me out. He thought I was still the woman who smoothed things over, the woman who avoided scenes at all costs. He forgot that I was also the woman who designed hurricane-proof foundations. I called the sheriff's department, not the emergency line, but the direct line to the desk sergeant, whose daughter I had written a recommendation letter for. 10 minutes later, blue lights flashed through the sheer curtains of the living room. I walked downstairs. Christopher was sitting on the sofa, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking disheveled and defiant. When the doorbell rang, he flinched. I opened the door. Deputy Miller stood there, hat in hand. "Evening, Mrs. Hayes," he said politely. "We got a call about a trespasser?" "Yes, Deputy," I said, stepping aside. "This gentleman refuses to leave the property after being served a formal notice." Christopher stood up, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "This is ridiculous, Miller. I'm her husband." "I live here." "Actually, sir," Miller said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. The copy Sutton had faxed over. "According to the property records, this house belongs to the Beaumont Trust. You're listed as an occupant. Mrs. Hayes has the right to revoke that status." "This is a civil matter," Christopher sputtered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She's doing this to humiliate me." It became a criminal matter when you threatened to kick down the door, Christopher, I said softly. I don't feel safe. That was the kill shot. The magic words. I don't feel safe. Deputy Miller's posture shifted. He squared his shoulders. His hand drifted near his belt. Sir, he said, his voice dropping an octave, I'm going to need you to set the drink down and step outside. We can do this the easy way, where you grab your bags and call a cab. Or we can do this the hard way, where you leave in the back of my cruiser. Christopher looked at Miller. He looked at me. He looked at the crystal glass in his hand, the last symbol of the life he was losing. He slammed the glass down on the coffee table hard enough to crack the coaster. Fine, he hissed. Fine. You want to play it like this? You'll regret it, Catherine. You'll beg me to come back. Don't forget your boxes, I said, gesturing to the sad pile of cardboard in the hallway. I packed your toiletries. I even included the moisturizer. You look tired. He grabbed the boxes, struggling with the weight, and stormed out into the night. I watched from the doorway as he shoved his life into the trunk of the BMW, the car he didn't know was uninsured, and peeled out of the driveway. I closed the door. I locked it. And then, for the first time in 20 years, I breathed. The next morning, the phone calls started. Not from Christopher, but from the people he had lied to. Mrs. Hayes, this is Marcus Thorne. We met at the Gala. Of course, Marcus, I said, putting on my best hostess voice. How are you? I'm concerned, Catherine. I've been trying to reach Christopher. We had a verbal agreement regarding the Summit surgical investment. He assured us the capital was secured through your family trust. Oh, Marcus, I said, letting out a heavy, tragic sigh. I was afraid he might have said that. Afraid? Christopher. He's been under a lot of strain lately. The truth is, the trust has no involvement in Summit Surgical. We never did. I tried to tell him that using the Beaumont name to secure private equity was problematic, but he was so enthusiastic. Silence on the line, the sound of a checkbook snapping shut. He told us he had a letter of intent, Marcus said, his voice cold. He showed us a document. Did he? I asked innocently. I'd be very interested to see that document, Marcus, since I'm the only trustee with signature authority, and I certainly didn't sign it. If he's forging documents, well, that's a matter for the authorities, isn't it? I see, Marcus said. Thank you for your candor, Catherine. I need to make some calls. Please do, I said. And Marcus, if he asks you for money for a lawyer, I wouldn't lend it to him. I hung up. I pictured the dominoes falling. Marcus would call the other investors. They would call the bank. The bank would call the loan. The house of cards wasn't just falling, it was being incinerated. 3 days later, the hospital board convened an emergency session. I wasn't in the room, but my presence was felt in every document Barrett laid on the mahogany table. I waited in the hospital atrium, drinking bad coffee, watching the elevator numbers change. Finally, the doors opened. Christopher walked out. He wasn't wearing his white coat. He was carrying a cardboard box, the universal symbol of corporate death. He looked smaller. The arrogance that usually held his spine straight had evaporated, leaving a slumped, defeated man in a wrinkled shirt. He saw me sitting on the bench. He stopped. "Are you happy?" he asked. His voice was flat, hollow. "No," I said honestly. "I'm not happy, Christopher. I'm relieved. There's a difference." "They forced me out," he said, staring at the floor. "Barrett threatened to go to the police with the forgery charges if I didn't resign. They're reporting me to the medical board for the affair with a subordinate. I might lose my license." "You might," I agreed. "Actions have consequences. It's a concept they teach in kindergarten. I'm surprised you missed it." "I have nothing," he whispered. "No job, no house, no money. The investors are suing me for fraud." "You have your freedom," I said, standing up. "You wanted a new life, didn't you? A life with Monica. A life without the boring old wife dragging you down. You have it. Go live it." "Monica left," he said, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. She texted me this morning, said she couldn't be with a man who lied about his financial status, said she has a reputation to uphold. Imagine that, I said. A woman who dates married men worried about her reputation. The irony is staggering. I adjusted my purse on my shoulder. Goodbye, Christopher. Sutton will be in touch about the divorce settlement. I suggest you sign whatever he sends. It's the only way you stay out of jail. I walked away. I didn't look back. I walked out of the hospital he had used to build his ego, past the donor wall where my family's name was etched in gold, and into the bright, blinding sunshine. The legal battle was short, brutal, and entirely one-sided. We met in the conference room of Paxton and Sterling. Christopher had a public defender type of lawyer, a man with a cheap suit and a tired expression who clearly knew he was outgunned. Sutton laid the evidence on the table: the burner phone records, the GPS logs, the forged loan documents, the forensic accounting of the stolen funds. We are prepared to file criminal charges for grand larceny and forgery, Sutton said, tapping the stack of papers. Or we can settle this civilly. Christopher looked at the papers. He looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. He hadn't shaved in days. What do you want? He asked hoarsely. Everything, I said. I don't have anything. You have a future income, Sutton corrected, however meager it may be. We want a full confession of the debt. You owe the trust $340,000 for your education. You owe the trust $200,000 for the fraudulent loan. We want a payment plan. I can't pay that. I'm unemployed. Then you'll drive Uber, I said, or you'll work in an urgent care clinic in the middle of nowhere. I don't care how you earn it, Christopher. But you will pay back every single cent you took from my family. You will not walk away from this marriage with a profit. His lawyer leaned over and whispered in his ear. Christopher nodded slowly. He looked defeated. He looked broken. Fine, he said. Give me the pen. He signed. He signed away his claim to the house, his claim to the cars, his claim to any alimony. He signed an admission of debt. He signed his life away. Watching him sign, I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't triumph. It was the feeling of a heavy weight finally being set down. I wasn't carrying him anymore. The ink was dry. The notary stamped the documents with a heavy thud. It's done, Sutton said, closing the folder. Christopher stood up. He didn't look at me. He looked at the door like it was a portal to a hostile dimension. Catherine, he said, pausing with his hand on the knob, was any of it real? The 20 years? I looked at him. I remembered the man I had married. I remembered the laughter, the trips to the coast, the quiet moments before the ambition ate him alive. It was real to me, I said. That's why I had to destroy you, because you made it fake. He flinched, as if I had slapped him. Then he opened the door and walked out. I walked to the window. I watched him cross the parking lot to a rusted Honda Civic, a rental, probably, or a loaner. He had trouble starting it. It sputtered, choked, then finally turned over. He drove away, merging into traffic, just another gray car in a sea of gray cars. Sutton came up beside me. You okay? I'm fine, I said, and for the first time in months it wasn't a lie. I'm actually fine. What now? Sutton asked. You have the house. You have the money. What are you going to do? I looked at the skyline of Charleston. I saw the cranes, the construction, the growth. I'm going to build something, I said, something that has my name on it. And this time, I'm checking the foundation myself. It is amazing how much can change in 90 days when you aren't carrying 180 pounds of dead weight. I ran into Christopher yesterday at the grocery store, not the gourmet market in the village, but the discount chain on the outskirts of town where I was buying supplies for the food bank I now volunteer with. He didn't see me at first. He was staring at the frozen dinners, calculating the price per ounce. He looked ordinary. He was wearing scrubs, generic ones, not the embroidered blue silk he used to favor. He had gained a little weight, lost a little hair. He looked like a tired middle-aged man who worked too hard for too little money. I heard he's working at a walk-in clinic in North Charleston, treating sinus infections and sprained ankles. No galas, no awards, no nurses looking at him like he's a god. Just 12-hour shifts and a studio apartment. I almost walked away. I almost left him to his frozen lasagna and his regrets. But then I remembered who I was. I walked up to him. "Hello, Christopher." He jumped. He spun around, clutching a box of Salisbury steak like a shield. "Catherine," he stammered. Wow, you look great." I did. I was wearing a linen suit I had designed myself. I had cut my hair short, a sharp, angular bob that exposed my neck. I looked like an architect. "I am great," I said. "I just wanted to thank you." He blinked. "Thank me? For what?" "For calling me an associate," I said, smiling. It was the most honest thing you ever said to me. It reminded me that this was a business arrangement, and in business you have to know when to cut your losses. He looked down at his shoes. "I miss the house," he whispered. "It's a beautiful house," I agreed. "I'm turning the carriage house into a studio. I'm starting my own firm, Beaumont Design. You should check out our website. We do renovations. We specialize in tearing down unstable structures and building something that lasts." I patted him on the arm. It was a gesture of pure, toxic benevolence. "Take care of yourself, Christopher. Make sure you pay that bill on the 1st. Sutton gets cranky when the checks are late." I walked away, the click of my heels on the linoleum sounding like applause. I didn't look back. I had a meeting with a contractor in 20 minutes, and for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the blueprints. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.